Sure. Hello, Block Tempo readers.
Hello, Blog Tempo. Taiwan is a developed country with a very technological base, like TSMC, all the big companies making physical products, very high tech, high GDP, and international trade. So exporting memory chips, CPUs, video cards, all this kind of technology internationally. So it's a country with a lot of international trade opportunity. And with Liquid, which is a Bitcoin layer 2 for trading, we're focused on real world assets. So shares in companies, bonds, different types of securities that have a real value. So not speculative tokens, but actually registered securities, shares in companies, or things with a security interest. I think it's interesting for governments, and presumably eventually it will happen with larger governments. Already there have been a few governments, like the El Salvador government, the Bhutan government mining, and presumably sovereign wealth funds in a few countries already being exposed via either Bitcoin ETFs or Bitcoin correlated stocks like MicroStrategy and NVIDIA indirectly correlated. And I think the sort of interest for a country to start is that the first major country to start and start quietly has an advantage, because as if you're the second mover or the third mover, the information, once it becomes public, that a bigger, more developed country acquiring a Bitcoin reserve will change the market dynamic, and then it will make Bitcoin more expensive for the second and third participant.
As someone who's been in Taiwan for a long time and worked in financial services in Taiwan for a long time as well, I think it makes a ton of sense for Taiwan to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But realistically, I think Taiwan's central bank is very conservative, and in many ways, I think that's a great approach for the economy. One thing that I think could change dramatically is, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the re-election of Donald Trump, which I think is, really exciting. It's captured a lot of people in the Bitcoin world's imagination. And if they take a more accommodative stand on Bitcoin policy, then I think that will have ripple effects, all around the world, including Taiwan. And I think often the Taiwanese regulators will look to what the approach is being taken in larger economies like the US and Japan, and kind of watch to see what they do before they initiate anything in Taiwan. So I don't think we'll be a first mover in Taiwan, but hopefully we could be a second mover and follow any positive changes that come out of the US.
Well, I guess historically it's been bottom up, right? And Bitcoin doesn't really have a marketing department because it's a commodity, decentralized. There's no CEO, there's no, a lot of altcoins have money that they've printed basically. So there's no marketing budget. So really, it's quite interesting that Bitcoin is has a market dominant position. It's the only really credible investment grade crypto asset, and it's entirely organic, right? So, and I think that's rewarded by regulators recognizing Bitcoin as different to the other crypto assets. You see it even in the US with the SEC, were clearly saying that Bitcoin was a commodity. I think people adopt Bitcoin ultimately by learning about it and then out of self-interest. Once they start with a position, they learn more. And I think many people, they're more motivated to learn if they own a little bit, and then they learn a lot more about money and inflation and start to buy more and then start to tell their friends about it. So it's, people get interested in Bitcoin for different reasons. Some people just have some coincidental use, or a use where the only way to pay was Bitcoin, or others for an investment. But they always end up learning about everything because it becomes interesting. It's the Bitcoin rabbit hole kind of experience that most people have gone through.
I think that's something really interesting about Bitcoin is it's probably the first asset kind of its size now where average investors like you and me, we had an opportunity to get in ahead of, not only massive institutionals like, BlackRock and all these other people that are putting together various financial products around Bitcoin, but also whole countries as well. And I think what tends to happen with individuals is you buy a little bit of Bitcoin, number goes up, and that's kind of a Trojan horse and forces you to learn more about it. And then you kind of understand the other kind of value propositions behind Bitcoin, censorship resistance, and all of these kind of things. And I think that's probably, what will happen with, institutional investors and with countries as well. So people might start off investing into the Bitcoin ETF and then get curious about the other value propositions behind Bitcoin and then move into buying actual, physical proper Bitcoin as well. So I think that can be a driver. The price, the number goes up, I think is a big driver for Bitcoin and for, people from retail investors to institutionals to countries. Yeah, I think it has different kind of approaches in different markets. And one thing is, a lot of English-speaking countries, we come at it from the perspective of a speculative asset because we have so many other payment options and we have so many other ways and opportunities to interact with financial markets. And then interestingly, things like Bitcoin and USDT, they have a lot of traction in the global south too, where people have less options. So I think that's an interesting thing to kind of keep in mind, as well as that people in different markets approach these kind of assets in a different way as well. In Taiwan, I think it's probably as an investment asset, as an inflation hedge, right? I mean, Taiwanese people have a lot of money. I think per capita, Taiwanese are the richest people in Asia. There's a lot of US dollars in Taiwan. So I think people who are looking to preserve wealth, and we've got like a small caveat, of like geopolitical risk as well. So it makes sense for people to have some of their assets allocated to something that can not only offset inflation, but is also movable with your person. Yeah. If you ever, for some reason, need to leave Taiwan, then you can bring your wealth with you. So I think that's, probably the primary use case in Taiwan, I think, in the short term. And Taiwan is an interesting market. We were talking about this yesterday, is in the Asian markets, like in India, in Korea, in Taiwan. Retail are a big part of the local stock market, right? So you have very sophisticated investors here with a lot of assets. They tend to manage their own portfolios. So I think everybody is coming to realize that they need to understand Bitcoin. You can't not understand Bitcoin, and your allocation can't be zero. It has to be something. So that's kind of what I think will happen in Taiwan. I've been saying that for a long time though. So, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, Liquid Network is for trading mostly, like issuing securities, issuing stablecoins, trading them in a trustless way. And so any kind of trade settlement, share trading can all happen on Liquid. There are public company stocks that are securitized and tokenized on Liquid. There are bonds like promissory notes, like small business loans, basically in a tradable form, and stablecoins, Bitcoin itself, of course, MicroStrategy stocks of different startups. So it's all possible. And I think the difference from trading on an online brokerage, which presumably retail investors in Taiwan do, as in other countries, they would, they'd have their assets in custody of that brokerage, right? So with Liquid, you can use a wallet, basically, to do trading. So you have keys for your own assets. So you have a stablecoin, a Bitcoin, maybe shares in a securitization fund. So you can place those orders in a trustless way with a central order book or a distributed order book. And there are a few markets like this. Sideswap is a centralized order book and Liquid Bitcoin wallet. TDEX is a decentralized version, which is sort of similar, but the orders are broadcast instead of on a central order book. And then Crypto Garage, a Japanese company, which Blockstream is a small shareholder in, is a joint venture between Digital Garage, a public market company in Japan that has some Bitcoin R&D projects, and Tokyo Tenchi, the settlement network, are the shareholders. And that has a Japanese yen stablecoin approved by the JFSA and Liquid Bitcoin for institutional traders to OTC trade, again without custody. So this is all using the kind of native trustless swap and trustless limit order features of Liquid. And that even works with hardware wallets. So you can have the assets that you're going to trade with in a hardware wallet. You can approve to trade in a hardware wallet. And what goes into the order book is just a signed limit order. So the actual coins stay in your wallet until somebody takes the order. I think you can see that with the spot ETFs approved in the US, it enabled different types of investors to gain access because, for more technically minded, of course, it's an advantage to be able to store your own Bitcoin to back it up, to use a hardware wallet. But for some investors, that's too technical. So it's much easier for them, or they're more familiar with calling a broker or using an online brokerage. And the ETF allows them to do that and to, store it alongside their shares, sort of part of their share portfolio. So it simplifies things because they don't have to manage the cold storage, and they can, get tax reporting along with their other investments, and inheritance is taken care of in the same way, right? There's as a securities account or a brokerage account is an inheritable asset or collection of assets, right? So while it's good for Bitcoin that a good amount of people have physical custody of their coins, you can also think about the ETFs as simply an easier way to access Bitcoin, basically. So, favorable regulations that make it easier to do that, or to do that with locally issued ETFs, I think could be a good step.
Yeah, that's not only is it kind of tough technical limitations, but I think there's a lot of funds and a lot of investors that have, mandate and regulatory restrictions. So they can't just open up an account with people like Bitfinex and then do crypto trading. So they kind of needed the whole Bitcoin to be wrapped up in a securities package before they could allocate capital to it. So I think one of the things that we're going to see happen over the next couple of years is, for a large part, I think the Bitcoin markets and digital asset markets and traditional assets have been two separate worlds. I think we're going to see these worlds kind of come together more, and kind of the middle ground blur a little bit with things like tokenized securities. So the Bitcoin ETF is a securitized token. And I think the next step is, tokenizing securities. I think that's something, I'm really optimistic for Taiwan on, and I really hope that Taiwan can see this opportunity, understand it. Because there's an opportunity, I think, for markets to get that. Like Adam said, first mover advantage. If you're one of the first to figure out that opportunity, I think there's a real opportunity to leapfrog the other markets. And kind of close the distance with some of the bigger markets in the region. For Taiwan, that's like, Hong Kong, Singapore. That's a big opportunity. And that ties back to what you said about the tokenized MicroStrategy stock. It trades 24/7. when I was in banking, one of the products we used to do, and used to be very popular in Taiwan, was to do ADRs and GDRs, right? And the idea of that is to give offshore investors in the US and Europe access to Taiwanese stocks, but on a time and in a kind of structure that's convenient for them. And STOs are the exact same idea, but I think you could do it even better because you can go to all markets at once. So, I've often thought that could be a real opportunity for Taiwan. And I think for the local, the national exchanges, they shouldn't look at that as competition. They should look at that as complementary, because we have different kinds of investors on our platform on Bitfinex securities with different kind of investment theses and time horizons. And the traditional markets have their investors. And I think there's an opportunity to drive arbitrage across the platforms and drive volumes. So, I've always thought that could be a really kind of interesting and a creative thing for Taiwan to do.
Well, yeah, I think that before the US spot ETFs, more of the financialization around Bitcoin was occurring internationally, like maybe in Switzerland or some other countries which are good, have respected regulators in terms of financial prudence, but are more agile and early adopters. So I think the US helps itself with this, new stance by bringing more of that business and economic opportunity to the US, which under the previous regime was basically most fintech companies working on Bitcoin-related things would do it outside the US. For that reason, it was just complicated to operate there.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge too is that in the bigger markets, kind of in like G7 markets, where financial services are a bigger part of GDP, I think you tend to get more pushback from the incumbent players, from the banks, the custodians, the depositories. And part of tokenization is the idea of disintermediation. So a lot of those roles probably aren't technologically necessary. So I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes from. I think that the change in the administration policy will definitely be favorable. We'll kind of have to see how it plays out. But again, I think, the big financial services providers have got a taste of number go up with the Bitcoin ETF. It's been, by all accounts, like a phenomenally successful product. I think, Bitcoin's market cap passed silver recently, and the BlackRock ETF AUM passed their gold AUM. So it's a massively successful product. So I think they'll be looking at different ways to kind of monetize, what they've done with the Bitcoin ETFs. So that should be positive for the industry as well. Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of feel slightly disappointed to the degree that our world, our ecosystem has been influenced by the legacy financial system. And I feel like we haven't had a really equal impact on the system yet. But I hope I think that's starting to play out. Like Adam mentioned, you see players like Stalker and Sideswap and ourselves, Bitfinex Securities, that are kind of pushing the edge of that. And I kind of think it might develop in two separate paths. Like you might see one path at the G7 where they're slightly more hesitant to take this approach. And then you might see emerging markets, we're regulated and licensed in El Salvador, to take a more aggressive approach. And then kind of over time, see which one the market likes and which one is more successful. So I think it's an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I think the securitization into tokens of existing shares and financial instruments is interesting. But you've got some kind of crossover or interface between traditional finance assets and Bitcoin. So with the spot ETF, that's brought Bitcoin into the traditional financial wrapper, the ETF. But then with the securitization and tokenization of shares, like the MicroStrategy token, which is a Luxembourg securitization vehicle. And a Luxembourg securitization vehicle is very popular internationally for kind of interface to some types of financial instruments. So a favorable structure, basically. So that brings the traditional financial assets into the tokenized market world, either exchange traded, like Bitfinex securities and Merge, or self-custody using trustless sort of OTC markets, basically. And there's an opportunity for those markets to interact and arbitrage too. It's like possible for a central order book exchange like Bitfinex to integrate decentralized order matching using their hot wallet, so that some traders could be doing high frequency trades or custodial trades, and they could still match against decentralized trades. So you can sort of make a unified market out of that too in a quite efficient way. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, just at the application level, you see, as Jesse said, that the emerging markets actually are originating much more payment-related remittances and trade payments in stablecoins and in Bitcoin, whereas for the developed world, it's more about the investment. Now, of course, gray markets and access to different markets also use Bitcoin in the developed world. But you can see there's a bias towards payments and higher concentration of retail payments in developing countries. And then for Liquid, it's a neutral technology, so people will use it for different purposes. So in emerging markets, you see local stablecoins or US dollar stablecoins like Tether being quite popular. And on Liquid, you have Tether, and you have some other stablecoins as well that are of interest to emerging markets. And Liquid also has a new Lightning model. So there's a company called Boltz Exchange, which does trustless swaps between Liquid Bitcoin and Lightning. And that's become a popular way to make a very simple and robust Lightning wallet, which doesn't require channel management. So Aqua wallets, Bull Bitcoin's new wallets, Breeze has made an API. They call it a nodeless Lightning option. And Peach wallet, so many wallets are starting to adopt this. And that's quite interesting for developing markets because it integrates Lightning in a convenient way. And Lightning is more what you're going to use for retail payment value. Like doing on-chain transactions gets a bit expensive. And also because it's liquid, you have ready availability of Tether stablecoin in the same wallet as well. So people are sort of using swap APIs to convert Tether into liquid Tether. So Tether is available on multiple networks, and to transact Lightning, but all using a liquid wallet, basically. Right. Yeah, so there's an emergence of kind of multi-layer wallets. So, Bull Bitcoin, Aqua, Peach, it's all a similar idea. And Breeze now that you have Bitcoin, Liquid, and Lightning all in the same wallet and in a fairly intuitive, simplified user experience.
On the regulatory side, I was going to say too, is that Liquid has this functionality for AMP assets called transfer restricted assets. And I think that's one of the key things that will make tokenized securities possible in mature markets, because you can set up whitelists. And whitelists are really, I think, what will make the whole kind of idea sustainable and approved by the regulators, because once people are on the whitelist, then they can withdraw assets off the platform and they can trade them peer-to-peer. The blockchain mining node used to trade in a Telegram chat. It's a registered security with an ISIN, and people can ping it back and forth in a Telegram chat. You can self-custody it, or you can move it to other exchanges for arbitrage. So I think that whitelisting functionality is really key, and I think Liquid's probably a leader in that. And I think that's what makes the whole security token business possible, because regulators won't let you issue bearer assets. They need to know who the shareholders are, they need to know who the companies are. And I think that's one of the things that Liquid makes possible. I think will make tokenization possible in bigger markets with stricter regulators.
And it's much more robust and simple and easy to use than other blockchains, which store a lot of state and make a lot of complexity in the chain. With Liquid, the AMP assets, I mean, you have regular assets like Tether, Bitcoin, which are just single sig wallets, but the AMP, like securities assets, are multi-sig. So there's two signatures, one in your wallet and one from the share registration agent. So every time you transact, the share registration agent is updating the share registry in real time. So they know who has how many shares and they have a record of it. And yet, despite that, the network on Liquid is confidential. So somebody looking on a block explorer can't see how many shares traded, what price they traded at, or even whether it's a share or a Tether or a Bitcoin. It's not visible to people on the blockchain in general. And once you are whitelisted, the experience is very Bitcoin-like. So, with the MicroStrategy token, CMSTR is 100 MicroStrategy shares. So it is about $38,000 per token, but you can transfer it down to 1/10,000th part. So 100 of a MicroStrategy share, which is about $3. So you could, using CMSTR, you don't have to do a trade or a transaction. You don't have to do a trade. You can also do a transaction. So you can, pay for a lunch bill with somebody else who's, set up to trade it just by sending them, a few hundredths of a MicroStrategy share, for example, which is a very unique experience, right? In a traditional world, to actually withdraw shares from one trading platform, you're basically going to get the shares sent to another trading platform. People very rarely do this. It's like if you changed, from E-Trade to another platform or something, right? Or to interactive brokers, you would have to get a lot of information, it would take days, and it's very manual. So with Liquid, that's real time, and you can operate with self-custody rather than just transfer between brokerages, basically. Well, I mean, I think MicroStrategy with Michael Saylor has been encouraging other companies to consider keeping some of their treasury in Bitcoin. And I think he's quite successfully demonstrated the economic advantages of that. So it's almost shocking that so few companies have, made use of his playbook, because he literally runs an annual seminar teaching companies how to do it. And I think it became a lot easier to do it since the spot ETFs, at least for the American companies or countries that can access the US spot ETF, because that is a well understood financial instrument, an ETF, whereas MicroStrategy did it before that, and they had to use custodians and get the accounting analysis. So I think it's, of course, the argument is that with relatively high inflation in major currencies, that holding currencies or, treasuries like government bonds is losing money, inflation adjusted, right? So then the idea is usually companies are paying out dividends, and by buying Bitcoin instead, they can, hold on to their reserves and over the long term outperform inflation. So that's the concept. And MicroStrategy in particular also tries to raise capital to do more of it, right? But it's certainly possible just to passively convert some treasury reserves into Bitcoin reserves.
Well, I'm not really very clear on the details. I'm not sure in Taiwan if you can put Bitcoin on your balance sheet. I'm not sure if that's legal or not. So if it's not, then I guess that should be made legal so that they can do that and apply that strategy. But a digital asset framework, I think, is also important. I think what El Salvador has done is a pretty good template. So El Salvador is kind of interesting because they're a very small country. And you've got regulators and policymakers and central banks all around the world kind of investigating Web3, and Bitcoin and, all these different altcoins. But it's really El Salvador that I think has kind of landed on the most accretive parts of our industry, because the digital asset industry is very noisy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise and very little signal. And El Salvador, this small country, they're the only one that has really figured out that there's kind of three important parts of this whole industry. And it's Bitcoin, it's stable coins, and it's tokenized securities, including RWA. So I think that's really interesting, and maybe that's something.
Know how to use it.
I think more important, I think they figured out what the important part is. Because if you don't know what the important part is, you don't know what to regulate or how to change your policies. And I think a lot of regulators are just kind of, thrashing around, looking at Web3 and looking at these various things and kind of struggling to find where the value is. And I think El Salvador's done a really good job of finding what the value is and then going from there. So maybe that's the first step.
Yeah.